12-day war as opposed to the 6-day war. And I will just say that this Wall Street Journal article by Elliot Abrams got released yesterday, and there has been a lot of people reacting to it, talking about it. A friend of mine in Israel did like a 2.5-hour live stream this morning about it. And so trying to keep up with all that has been a little bit daunting, overwhelming. And the answer is, you'll hear me speculate about some things. I'll give you my opinions. I do think this is a very incredible time in Bible prophecy as we're seeing things unfold with respect to Israel. Israel's sort of at the center of this. The Middle East is at the center of this. It's a big deal. And then there's some other things I might, if I have time, I'll get to some AI stuff that I think is important. But I'm going to put that at the end because we're going to deal with the Israel thing first, since it's forefront of everybody's mind. But there are a lot of things in play right now with respect to Bible prophecy. There's a lot of speculation. It's interesting, on my friend Yishai Fleischer, the Yishai Show, he did about 2.5 hours this morning. He had on one of his predecessors as the official spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron, where the Tomb of the Patriarchs is located, the structure built by Herod. And then he had on somebody that he didn't necessarily agree with, and then he had on his wife, which he agreed with. I mean, I don't want to imply that he doesn't agree with his wife, but and the thing that's interesting is that all of these are the one thing to keep in mind, as we've seen with the American deep state or leftovers in the State Department and military and that type of thing, is that there's a lot of things leaked out to the press that are trying to control the narrative. And it may very well be that this article in the Wall Street Journal by Elliot Abrams, I think some of it is factually based, but it also may be trying to control the narrative of the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. Just like we've seen this all through this dispute over the last few months. Oh, Trump and Netanyahu don't get along. They don't like each other. They're not speaking. Trump is really showing Netanyahu who's boss. Netanyahu is undermining Trump. And the answer is somewhat, there's a little bit there, but then Trump and Netanyahu will come out and say, hey, we're getting along fine. I don't know what anybody's talking about. This is the thing. So we live at this time, and this is kind of an interesting, the four horses and whether they're riding yet. I know that if I even suggest that, I'll get in trouble with a lot of people. I suggested this last week that, I was going to do these screens to kind of unfold. And somebody said, well, why don't you just make up a end times Jeopardy game, and fill in this. So let's see, I'll take rapture timing for 200, Alex. And then we can just offend everybody by that. So, and again, I'll reference Daniel chapter 12, but it's also in Daniel chapter 11 that as we get into this end times, I think we're going to understand things a little bit better. But I will say that right now, opinions on how things are unfolding in the Middle East are like noses. Everybody has at least one of them, right? And everybody's expressing their opinion. So when I was watching the comments in Yishai's program this morning, and he's a Zionist Orthodox rabbi, and then then the Christians and the Jews were arguing about theology and that type of thing. And then people started opining on aspects of Daniel. The leopard is, the lion is Britain, the lion is the United States, the leopard is Russia, the leopard is Turkey. And and it became very apparent within 5 paragraphs that there were many opinions expressed about how things were going to unfold, and none of them agreed with any other opinion. So that's the time that we're in. So I think sometimes we need to kind of catch our breath a little bit and look at things that are unfolding. So this is the New York Times the other day, and in the 12-day war, assessing Iran's nuclear capabilities after wave of strikes. I only put it up because they did some pretty good graphics. They show, for example, what is Iran going to be able to do in the future? Can they convert uranium to gas? Can they store the enriched uranium? And there's a lot of controversy right now about 800 pounds or so of enriched plutonium that may have been removed from these facilities before the attack, might have been removed after, might still be there. And everybody's concerned, if we drop a bomb on that, it's going to set off a nuclear explosion. I don't think that that's likely because of the way you have to weaponize this nuclear fuel. It could cause some radioactivity. My suggestion was that if there was radioactivity release, that did I say this last week? That Trump should call up Vladimir Putin and say, "Hey, Vlad, I got a deal for you." Did I say this last week? Okay, the big, beautiful deal to get rid of it. Okay, because you guys didn't know what you were doing on Chernobyl, and maybe you learned some lessons. So I won't repeat that, even though I thought it was pretty good. And so then are they going to be able to? Here's like sustain nuclear expertise. So, for example, the assessment of the New York Times and the experts they relied on is that was likely harm. They took out a lot of the top nuclear scientists. But like other things, just like in our country, if you took out a bunch of nuclear scientists, there would be nuclear scientists behind them. And maybe you just ask AI, right? With all the AI stuff, hey, how do I make that kind of weapon? And maybe AI will tell you. Enrich uranium, damaged but extent unclear. I think some of the things I'm seeing are indicating that it was probably damaged pretty severely. Mine uranium ore appears unaffected. Nobody attached that. Make a bomb, most likely damaged. And then there's some other things. Deliver a weapon, still possible. But I'm gonna play an extended clip from there's a guy in Azerbaijan, and I don't know. I assume he's Muslim or anything. He does these amazing videos with incredible graphics. If I could figure out there's actually videos online about how to make graphics like the Caspian Report makes graphics, but I haven't been able to figure out the video that tells me how to do it to figure out how he did it. Because there's a learning curve, but he does great graphics. And I assume he's from Azerbaijan. I assume he might be Muslim. And I don't always agree with this assessment, but he does raise some interesting points. One, he lives there. I don't. And so he lives right in the middle and the heart of this. And there's a lot of Azeris, Azerbaijanis in Iran. It's a big ethnic class. So I think his opinion is important. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later. There's this question everybody asks, like, this is foreign policy. Why don't the Iranian people rise up? And the Caspian thing will say this. This is what the foreign policy article said. However, whereas Israel strikes effectively dismantled much of the IRGC's military and nuclear infrastructure, they only touch the tip of the iceberg in relation to its extensive suppressive apparatus. The main artery preserving the regime's domestic security was left relatively unscathed. In other words, despite Israel controlling the skies, the regime's security forces still dominated on the streets, leaving no space for the Iranian people to protest. Now, I'm not sure that that's true. But one of the things is that what happened there over that 12 days was an amazing display of Israel's prowess. A lot of Israeli sites or people that I follow, they're sort of adding another factor in that God had helped in what they did, that some of these things were so stunning, so precise. And, a couple of years ago, everybody was concerned about Iranian air defenses. They had some of the Russian S-300 systems, which are considered to be pretty good. But you remember there was also S-300 systems in Syria, which never seemed to hamper Israel from doing what they wanted. And then last October, Israel went in and took out most of these air defenses. Then the concern was that they would be replenished back. Vladimir Putin, by the way, recently did one of his long panels, 2.5 hours at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on June 20th. And there were questions from the press. There was also a separate news conference around that time that he gave. So I'm not remembering which one it came from. I think it was from the news conference. And somebody asked him, Mr. President Putin, why didn't Iran have these air defenses? And Putin said at the time, and I never know when to believe him. I usually don't believe much of what he says. But he said, well, they didn't ask for us. If they'd asked for them, we would have helped. Now, that may have just been him covering. It may have been him covering for the fact that things continue to go on between Ukraine and Russia. And, it's a war. If it's purely a war of attrition, Russia has a lot more stuff and a lot more people. But Ukraine has been very innovative in the way they've done things. They've done some stunning and amazing things in terms of defense and attacks on Russia. And if you remember back, all of the pro-Russian military guys all over the internet were saying this is over in 2 weeks. Well, it's been 2.5 years almost, and it's not over, and it may continue for a while, and it's been extremely bloody, extremely devastating on both sides of the issue. The propaganda is coming out from both sides like crazy, so sometimes it's hard to do. But in the midst of all this, Israel did this amazing attack on the Iranian air defenses. And now, for example, this was a recent interview that the CEO of Israel Aerospace, Boaz Levy, revealed in an interview on I-24 News this week that Israel has started on the Arrow 5 missile defense system, promising Star Wars level capabilities beyond Arrow 4, a big leap for Israel's air defense umbrella. And Israel's air defense umbrella did pretty well in this 12-day war with Israel. It intercepted, depending on how you count it, about 85% of missiles that were launched. Ballistic missiles are hard, and then there were some hypersonic missiles. And what they'll do is they'll send a missile in, the air defense systems will focus on that missile, and there'll be one right behind it that might be moving faster, and then that one will hit. So there was a lot of damage in Israel. I don't know exactly the extent of it, but some of the assessment by the Israeli people indicate that the missile defense system saved them billions and billions of dollars in damage. But there was extensive damage, and there were people killed, and that, I think the Israeli military would say that that's unacceptable. So the question that was, so we attacked, the United States, attacked with B-2 Spirit bombers. They dropped about 14 of these giant GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. And these bombs, by the way, when it was apparent back around 2007, 2008, that Iran was hardening and burying and then hardening its missile production, its missile storage, and its nuclear program, sometimes 200-300 feet underground, under mountains, and then putting reinforced concrete on top. If you go to the Pentagon, I don't know if I played any of it last week, there's a very good couple of parts of the news conference. There's one that's like 28 minutes and there's one 42 minutes. And I don't know if they're the same one. Find the 42-minute one because it includes the Joint Chief of Staff, the head of the Joint Chief of Staff of the military, talking about the fact that when it appeared that Iran was doing this, hardening its facilities underground, a couple of guys then have spent their life trying to figure out how do we get around that? How are we going to be able to take that out? And my understanding is that the GBU-57 bunker buster was developed so that it could attack the Iranian facilities. So here we are 15, 17, 18 years after it became apparent, and these weapons are used for the first time that we know of. And they were pretty effective. So there was a lot of controversy. There was somebody, again, this is the narrative war. I think last week I referred to it, Jesus said that there would be wars and rumors of wars. And I added to that saying that there are going to be wars of rumors in the end times. And that's pretty apparent now with all the propaganda. So it came out, they didn't do much damage. It wasn't, there was a Department of National Intelligence report. But even that report, when you look at the report that got released, it said that it was low confidence. So it was low confidence until it ran through like the New York Times and the CNN and Washington Post filters. And then it became, well, look, nothing happened. But that's not true. So last week, NBC did an interview with his name is Aragachi. He's the foreign minister of Iran. And in that interview, he says, well, the Fordo site was seriously damaged. So you see, you have to wait a little bit for the truth to come out. So Trump comes out immediately and says, that thing was obliterated. Then everybody says, oh, it can't be true. It can't be true because, we don't believe anything you say. So then they interviewed the foreign minister of Iran. By the way, and if he doesn't give this right, he can go home and be executed. There have been, by the way, the estimates are that the number of people executed in Iran for maybe helping Israel or being suspected of helping Israel exceeds the number of Iranians that were actually killed in the Israeli military strikes. Pretty amazing. So here's what he said in the CBS interview.
It's being reported that your government has announced that it is accelerating engineering work to reopen access to Fordo. What is the status at Fordo?
No one exactly knows what has transpired in Fordo. That being said, what we know so far is that the facilities have been seriously and heavily damaged. The Atomic Energy Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran is currently undertaking an evaluation and assessment of the report, which will be submitted to the government.
Have Iranian inspectors been able to access Fordo, or are they still trying to attempt to access it?
It is the Atomic Energy Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran that will have to respond to that question, because it's they who are currently doing the inspection and assessment.
President Trump has made it clear multiple times that Iran's nuclear facilities targeted in those U.S. strikes were, in his words, obliterated. Have they been obliterated?
It appears that they have been heavily and seriously damaged. However, I would like to reiterate that I do not have accurate information regarding the damage. But it appears the facilities are currently unusable until reports establish how long it will take for them to be restarted, or even if they can be restarted.
The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has told CBS News that Iran could likely start enriching uranium again within a few months. Is that your assessment as well?
Iran has this enrichment industry that is localized. We have not imported it from abroad, and this technology cannot be bombed. If there is this will on our part, and the will exists there in order to once again make progress in this industry, we'll be able to quickly repair the damages and make up for the lost time. No one at the moment says that the facilities have remained intact. It's the technologies and the know-how that are still there.
So he says it was severely damaged. Now, put that in the context of a guy who, I don't know how to say this in a kind way, lies for a living. And if he's admitting that it was seriously damaged, then it probably was seriously damaged. Now, one of the things that was a big concern about everybody was that, where's the Ayatollah? He hasn't been seen for a while. So yesterday he showed up at, in fact, even I believe at the funerals of these people. And if you remember the image from last week, which I think was one of the most telling images of the war, was a stack of 40 IRGC coffins. You know, it was 3 rows of 10, then a row of 9, then one on top of that. That's pretty stunning. And that they released that. Now, but that's not surprising that they released that, because being a martyr is everything to them. What's the old saying? They love death more than you love life. And that's what they believe will happen. But then it's always funny is if you want to be a martyr, then why do you do all this stuff to protect yourself? You know? And it's all like, well, on the road to becoming a martyr, we can do a lot of damage to other people. So this took place yesterday at a ceremony in, I believe in Tehran, and there the Ayatollah appeared to the cheers of the crowd. Of course, he's got the Palestinian keffiyeh around his thing, because the whole narrative and everything of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to put out is that this Palestinian issue is the biggest issue going. So that's the Ayatollah. So the Ayatollah appears to be alive. And by the way, the Mossad actually put out on their website or their Telegram or X channel, I forget where it was, that he had survived. Now, this is somewhat controversial. Into war in Gaza is Saudi Arabia's priority. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, and what is Saudi Arabia going to do? Is Saudi Arabia going to change? Are they going to normalize things with Israel? Are they going to? They've been demanding that there be a Palestinian state established. Is Mohammed bin Salman going to depart from that? Now, my view on the Palestinian state issue is I don't think he will until his father dies. King Salman is, I think, 89 now. He's getting up there. He's very frail. He's not, and it's pretty clear that everything in Saudi Arabia is being run by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In fact, a number of years ago, there appeared to be some tension developing between the Crown Prince and his father, and there were some directives issued that were signed Deputy King, which was kind of a very unusual thing for somebody in the Saudi royal family to do. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. And if I have time, I'm going to come back. In the Daily Sabah the other day, there was a big article about the Muslim context of all of this, that they really do believe that they're doing God's work. And this is true on the Shia side, the Iranian side, and it's true on the Sunni side. And so they'll unite when it comes to Israel. So let's look at this. So this is from the Wall Street Journal the other day. Netanyahu plays it smart in his relationship with Trump. And it's a balancing act. You may have noticed that sometimes President Trump is a bit volatile. You know, you're not sure exactly what he's doing. And And sometimes I think that's probably by design. He wants to keep people unsteady on their feet because it's a power move, and he's very good at it. And but by the way, there are people upset with Trump all over the place on all sides of the political spectrum. So this is what's, I think, important. So you'll hear a lot of people on the right, the Tucker Carlsons and other types, they'll say, oh, we have nothing to do with Iran. We should stay out of it. And by the way, what did they all say when Trump bombed Fordo? It's going to be World War III. It's going to be terrible. We're going to be at war. And has that come true? No. Now, could it? Yeah, it could. But they were saying if we did anything, I watched their videos, as painful as that is. They said it's going to be World War III immediately, and we have to do something about it. But this is, I think, an important thing. This is an article, and I'm not remember. Oh, this was from the Media Line. I've met Felice, I've met her and talked to her in Israel. And the Media Line is, I don't know what their political position is. They try to be very accurate in what they report. And this is the headline: Israeli military official says Iran's missiles can hit Europe, aiming to reach the east coast of the United States. Iran has developed a lot of missiles. The one thing that they seem to be short on were launchers. And every time they would launch a missile, Israel had complete control in the Iranian skies. I mean, this is a very unusual situation. There was no air force to resist what Israel wanted to do. There were no missile defenses or anything. So when they launched a missile, Israel would verify, this is where the target is, and they would go take out the launchers. Now, the Iranian propaganda was, those are all fake launchers that they're taking out. They're decoys. And probably some of them were, but they got a lot of the main ones. And so that, if you'll notice the number of missiles launched by Iran over the time, I think there were about 500 total. It got less and less and less every day because Israel was taking out the launchers. You can have 1 million missiles, but if you don't have the launchers, those missiles are no good. And remember, this also happened with Hezbollah. When Hezbollah, I was talking to analysts about this, I did some interviews with them. They were concerned at one point, it appeared that Hezbollah had one launcher for every 2 missiles or rockets that it had. That meant they could just overwhelm any air defense system. So what's Israel done? Well, Israel came up, they released Iron Beam, which instead of costing $50,000 or $100,000 per missile to launch to knock down a missile or rocket, they can do this for like $5 or $10. That's a pretty good cost benefit analysis, or it's pretty easy to do that cost benefit analysis. But hear this is what Felice says in her article. The missiles that Iran is developing can already reach Europe, and they have plans for further advancements that could enable them to strike the United States. That's their goal. When Khamenei goes in front of a crowd and leads chants and smiles when the crowd chants death to Israel, death to America, it's probably a good idea if you're involved in military defense in the United States that you take those claims and chants seriously because they intend to do them. Now, whether they're capable is always the question. I played a clip last week of an IDF former spokesperson for Netanyahu who said Netanyahu has been saying for 20, 30 years that they're close to developing a nuclear weapon. And so somebody looks at that and they say, and I saw this all over right-wing media, oh, look, Netanyahu has been lying for 30 years. Well, maybe they were close, but then Israel did something. They took out top nuclear scientists. They stole the nuclear archive from a warehouse in Tehran. It's just how they do this, or how they even think that they can do this and get away with it, is just beyond my comprehension. And then in this 12-day war, it became apparent that there were a lot of Israeli agents on the ground all over Iran directing things, feeding information to Israel. And now Tehran has tried to crack down on that, but I don't know how effective it will be. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But here's a headline. This is from Al-Akhbar newspaper in Lebanon. That is a Hezbollah mouthpiece. By the way, you haven't really heard much from Hezbollah. Hezbollah did do a street demonstration in Beirut yesterday that upset a lot of people. But right now, they're fairly neutralized and ineffective. So here's the headline, front page of Al-Akhbar the other day, and it says, our priority, Trump Netanyahu, our priority is Syria. Netanyahu to go to Washington again, a grand Syrian deal on the table. And so what I-24 News reported, and this appeared to be exclusive, what we've heard the last few weeks is Syria wants to join the Abraham Accords. Syria wants to come in. They want to normalize things with Israel. And everybody gets all excited. But then as you get close to the deal, things change. I'll use the analogy, it's like negotiating to buy a Persian rug. You can have the thing in your trunk and you can have paid for it and you're not sure that the deal is the deal. That's just the way it is. And it's part cultural, it's part religious. But so this was reported the other day, this is July 3rd by I-24. This was an exclusive at the time. No such thing as peace for free. Syria demands 1/3 of Golan for peace with Israel. So what happened was everybody talking about, oh, we're going to have a big, beautiful deal with Syria. They're going to come into the Abraham Accords and there's going to be normalization. And then the Syrians started negotiating the way that it appears that negotiations go in that particular religious culture. They started adding things like, well, you should have thought of this all the way along. So initially, and now even this has been changing. Syria demands 1/3 of Golan for peace with Israel. Here's what the article says. The new Syrian president has demonstrated unprecedented openness and opened direct lines of communication with Israel for security and military coordination in southern Syria. The Syria source stated. He added that the return of parts of the Golan Heights beyond those seized by Israel and Syrian territory by the IDF after the fall of the Assad regime. Israel took over all of Mount Hermon and some other places, is critical in other words, the return of the parts of the Golan Heights beyond those that Israel seized after Assad fell is critical for domestic public opinion to support such a step. Al-Shara, the head of the self-appointed, president of Syria, said would likely face significant internal resistance should he fail to do so. The source said, U.S. sanctions removal cannot be seen as Israeli pavement for peace with Syria. He concluded the sanctions removal is a separate matter. So now we're negotiating. So there were two scenarios. One, Israel would retain strategic areas in the Golan Heights equivalent to 1/3 of its territory, hand over 1/3 to Syria, and lease another 1/3 from Syria for a period of 25 years. And if you've ever been to the Golan Heights, I remember I was 30 years ago, we went there for the first time, and I'm not a military strategist or anything like that by any stretch of the imagination, but it was readily apparent, and if you've been to the Golan Heights, you know this to be true. In terms of a strategic military value, the Golan Heights may be the most valuable piece of property on the planet. Because when Syria controlled that, the Israeli farmers down along the Sea of Galilee were being bombarded by artillery all the time. And I know a few farmers, and I'm pretty sure those farmers that I know would be like the Israeli farmers. They don't really like artillery rockets dropping on their head while they're out there on the tractor. It's kind of a disincentive to farm. So Israel got the Golan Heights in the 67 war, and then there was a big agreement after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So Israel's maintained this. And remember, during the first Trump administration, one of the things he did was he recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And everybody got upset, but guess what? Nobody can do anything about it because Syria can't do it. Israel just decimated what was left over from the Assad military. So that's first scenario is third. Second one is Israel keeps 2/3 of the Golan Heights and hands over the remaining third to Syria with the possibility of its lease. Under this scenario, the Lebanese city of Tripoli, close to the Lebanese-Syrian border, and possibly other Lebanese territories in the north of the country and the Bekaa Valley would be handed over to Syria. And then you start to ask these questions. It's like, what? It says this, according to the source, Syria is seeking to reclaim sovereignty over Tripoli, one of the 5 regions cut off from Syria to establish a Lebanese state during the French Mandate. Oh, you mean that was recent? Yes, Lebanon didn't exist. Syria didn't exist. And by the way, in terms of how long it's been an independent country, Israel's controlled the Golan Heights far longer than Syria, so who has the right to the Golan Heights anyway? Handing over Tripoli and other Sunni majority Lebanese territories to Syria would also be included in the settlement, provided Israel is permitted to extend a pipeline to transport water from the Euphrates to Israel as part of a water agreement that includes Turkey, Syria, and Israel. Now, wait a minute. Now Turkey's involved? I mean, now all of a sudden we got a pipeline from the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates River is a big deal. Water is a very big deal in the Middle East. Israel has worked very hard through technology and other things to become a water superpower in the Middle East. Jordan, we have a friend lives in Amman, says their family, they have a cistern. That cistern is filled up the first of the month. And it has to last until the next month. So you got to, figure out, okay, who's going to take a shower today, who's not going to take a shower. I mean, it's because you got a finite amount of water. And you don't call up and say, could I get a little extra? Could I pay for it? And they're like, no, there is none, because Jordan is probably the most water scarce place on the planet. So look at how this is going to go. So there are a number of important areas. Of course, Tripoli is way up here. So that's the Sea of Galilee in the middle. To the right of that is the right and up is the Golan Heights. You see down here is Nahariya on the lower left-hand corner. That's the farthest north city in Israel. There's Beirut. There's Dara. That's about 30 miles east of the Sea of Galilee. That's where the Syrian civil war really started in 2011. Then you see Damascus. So you can see, so by the way, from Damascus there that I just put up to this lower circle on the left, Beirut, is probably 50 miles as the crow flies. So you would, if you've left, if you put this on a map of the United States and Columbus, you would get, from Damascus to Beirut a lot sooner than you would getting from Columbus to Mansfield. I mean, that's how close they are. So Syria now saying today, this is in JNS, that Israel's willing to return to the 74 border, or Syria is willing to return to the 74 border deal. Do you see what's happening? Is they're negotiating in the press. Oh, everything's fine, we're going to normalize, and then everybody starts talking and negotiating. So that's the Golan Heights there that I just outlined. The Sea of Galilee, again, is just below it. And then you have Nahariya over here on the coast. And then the Lebanon border just is a few miles north of Nahariya. But I found this gentleman, his name is Ofer Bentock. Now, I don't know who he is. He's a military geopolitical expert, at least that's according to his bio. And he has a big thread. I won't take time to go through the thread. You can find him on X under that name. at Ofer_Bentock. And he said this because this is the problem that we have. And we talk about the Abraham Accords. We want the Abraham Accords. Everything in the White House, we're going to expand the Abraham Accords. That was when they went to the UN back in September of 2023, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did an interview with Bret Baier, want to normalize with Israel, want to expand the Abraham Accords. And I think this is the thing that I am not convinced that the Trump administration, outside of a few people, understand this concept from Islam. In the eyes of Islam, Mr. Bentock says the Abraham Accords are not peace agreements, but a hudna, a temporary ceasefire aimed at building strength to attack the state of Israel in the future. Besides, the concept of Abrahamic religions is fake. So I think that I would agree with what he said. We're also seeing this rise in anti-Semitism all over the world. I don't have the video, but last night in Melbourne, I believe it was, a hateful mob in Melbourne, Australia, stormed an Israeli-owned restaurant while shouting the murderous death to the IDF chant, which is what that guy was saying in that Glastonbury music festival. Later, a synagogue was torched while Jewish families were inside. So you can see, I hope you can appreciate, balancing all of this and synthesizing it into something coherent and logical that flows is pretty much impossible. Because a lot of the stuff that I've seen, now everything you're going to see just really came up in the last 24 hours. So it was an early morning. So first I'm going to play a couple clips of the Kasperman report, just because I think they're very good, very well done, particularly if anybody can contact me about how to make those or can make those graphics, give me a call. There's a link to my email on the church website. So here we go. Part one of the Caspian report.
In the dead of night, American B-2 bombers struck deep inside Iran, targeting nuclear sites buried beneath layers of concrete and mountain rock. Satellite images show scorched craters and collapsed structures. Destroyed or not, one problem remains. Around 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium are unaccounted for. The Iranians secretly relocated these months ago in anticipation of an attack. If further enriched to 90%, which is a relatively simple process, the stockpile could produce enough fissile core for 9 nuclear weapons. And as long as that stockpile remains missing, as long as Iran retains even the slightest ability to build a bomb, Netanyahu will see the war as unfinished. With full nuclear removal off the table, Israel may now pursue the next best option, dismantling the apparatus that protects it. Early in the war, Israeli warplanes struck well beyond nuclear installations. They hit places like Khuzestan, Mahabad, and Tabriz, not just for military targets, but because these are Iran's fault lines, regions where national cohesion and unity are weakest, and where unrest can spread fastest. Thus, while the ceasefire holds on paper, Israel could now be aiming for not just destruction, but disruption, fracture the periphery, and the center might not hold. Former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has gone on a media blitz, arguing that the Islamic Republic is collapsing and positioning himself as the interim leader of a new Iran. But the narrative seems manufactured. His visibility peaked during the war, yet his engagement numbers remained oddly consistent, even during nationwide internet shutdowns. For instance, he received nearly the same number of likes and shares when Iranians were offline. That shouldn't be possible. These patterns suggest his following isn't rooted inside Iran, but instead amplified by bot activity. Supporting this, numerous Arabic language accounts on X began promoting him in near identical terms, flooding the platform with content designed to go viral. Meanwhile, mainstream media coverage echoed this push, primarily through right-leaning outlets, many of which are owned by media conglomerates.
So he makes some good points. Again, I don't agree with him, but there was a big push that the Crown Prince, he's coming back, he's going to take over Iran, they're going to restore something like the Shah, his father, the Shah, had back when he was deposed in 1979. But he's right. And so what happens, and this is true, you got to be very careful with this as you analyze the news, because sometimes the news will report things like, it's all over X, it's all over Instagram, it's all over TikTok, by the way, which I have refused to install. So if you send me TikTok stuff, I'm never going to be able to see it, just so you know. But, you know, Instagram and all this other stuff. So, and look, they're all talking about it. They're all saying this guy's coming back. And so then that sort of perpetuates the story, even though it might not be true. And so the question is, what's really going on in Iran? Now, there are many people that are optimistic. There are many people within the evangelical church who believe that there's been a big revival in Iran. I'm not certain of that. I know, I've seen the reports, I've heard the stories and that type of thing, and we pray that it's true, but he'll explain here in the next part of this, I think, why maybe we shouldn't get so excited that there's going to be a revolution in Iran. I think Iran was severely damaged. I think the regime is on its heels, but, and it's always a very big but, what's going to happen next? So here's part 2 of the Caspian report.
So clearly there is an organized effort to create the false impression of a grassroots movement in Iran. I use ground news to connect the dots because it allows me to check out local news to app and enter take up arms against the government. The language was careful, emphasizing freedom and self-determination. PJAK, a Kurdish militant group entrenched in Iran's northwest, issued a statement urging ethnic Kurds to take up arms against the government. The language was careful, emphasizing freedom and self-determination, but the subtext was clear. Iran is vulnerable, and its outer provinces know it. PJAK operates in Iran's Kurdistan and Kermanshah provinces, where ethnic Kurds make up the majority. Both regions have been heavily targeted by Israeli airstrikes, but these weren't nuclear facilities or missile bases. They were local command posts, intelligence